Additionally, closed captioning is available through Zoom, through the Zoom options displayed at the bottom of your screen. So feel free to go ahead and turn those on if you need them. I'm going to go ahead and get started, just kind of so that you know what to expect today, starting at now, 12:05, to allow some people to join. I'm going to just walk through a high-level overview, introducing the Ruth Foundation for the Arts, just so that you could get a little bit more context about our foundation and why we're really excited about this grant program. Then I'll be diving into an overview of the Wisconsin Special Projects Grant Program itself, talking through what the evaluation process, application, program priorities, what those aspects of the program look like. We also will have a special guest presentation from one of our inaugural Wisconsin Special Projects grantees, Geeks. And they will be hopping on a little bit later in this hour to walk through their project that they applied with about a year ago today. And I'm really excited to see what they bring too. So they're going to share a little bit of information about their project and some tips and things that they thought would be helpful for future applicants such as yourselves. Lastly, we'll go through some commonly asked questions that we've received over the past few weeks in preparation for the information session. So thank you to those of you that sent those questions in. And then we'll wrap the session by welcoming some questions from the Q&A feature of Zoom. So you could feel free to start thinking about those. We'll welcome those towards the end of the session. I'd also like to just take a moment to briefly introduce my colleagues on the call. Symphony, who's our Manager of Public Initiatives at Ruth Arts, Sarah, who is our Operations Assistant, and Erin, our Director of Communications. So they're going to be helping out running the session today. So thank you all. Okay, so just to start with a little bit about the Ruth Foundation for the Arts. Our overall goal and mission is to explore new possibilities for arts philanthropy with an artist-driven and people-centric approach. We care a lot about responding to the evolving needs of our communities, working across a wide spectrum of lived experiences and supporting those that seek the unconventional and exciting, which is why you might recognize if you're familiar with the grant program or read more about it before this, a lot of those values are reflected in the questions that we ask in the application. So we try to bring this ethos to everything that we do in all of our programs. We were launched in June of 2022, supported by a bequest from the late Ruth DeYoung Kohler. And this foundation is really based upon Ruth's dedication to artists and recognition of their integral role in communities. And so in response to that idea, when shaping this program, Ruth Arts launched with Artist Choice, which is our now annual artist nominated granting program. And since then, it's been about 2 years now, we've launched 10 distinct grants in addition to some public programs. So that Artist Choice program that's mentioned on this slide is our participatory grant making program, and it serves as the basis of much of our other programming. So we're constantly keeping the artist in mind and having that artist-centric approach, reviewing our programs to ensure that we're remaining true to those values and listening to artists, and also picking up on patterns that we notice throughout that artist nomination process to see what's really relevant and what artists are thinking about today. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide because I know we're all here to learn about Wisconsin Special Projects specifically, but just again to lend some more context about Ruth Foundation for the Arts granting scope. We fund nationally, and actually this Wisconsin Special Projects grant is our only open call program. So when we launched this program a year ago, it made a lot of sense to have this one be specific to Wisconsin, the home of Ruth DeYoung Kohler, and also our own home base of operations here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. The other initiatives and grants that are listed here are based primarily on artist nominations and the historical giving of Ruth. So to learn more about each of these programs, I definitely recommend checking out our website if you'd like to learn a bit more. I would also be remiss if I didn't mention our newer branch of programming. You'll see our public programs. We have a new art space in Walker's Point, Milwaukee, where we have our first exhibition, showing works in collaboration with and partnership with one of our grantees, the Andrews Humphrey Family Foundation. So along with that exhibition, we're offering a series of public programs, including artist talks, tours, and workshops in conjunction with that exhibit. So if you're around, definitely recommend checking that out. But yeah, this is just to kind of give a high level overview of some of the other things that we are prioritizing and working on. And as we dive a little bit deeper into Wisconsin Special Projects specifically, I think that you'll see how we take those values and apply it to all of these other programs too. So as I mentioned, this is our only open call program here at Ruth Arts, and it's specifically focused on funding small and mid-sized nonprofit visual and performing arts organizations situated in Wisconsin. So we aim to build or contribute to an equitable arts ecosystem by investing in these projects that have what we hope to be long-term cultural and structural impact for their communities. You'll see our program priorities here. You'll see similar words popping up throughout our application process, throughout our program descriptions, because we really want to emphasize these initiatives that are really ambitious and rethink and imagine past practices. We also want to bring an expansive range of voices into the public and artistic discourse, and overall just contribute to a more complex and abundant understandings of the histories and futures of this region. We know, being based in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, that there's a lot of really exciting work being done. So we love this program because it shows us what's out there and also continues to put that funding and opportunities into the state. So I'm just going to walk through a bit. I'll just say a few words about each of these program priorities. Like I mentioned, these do come up again and again in the application itself. And I think that these will be really helpful for you to keep in mind as you're crafting that application, relating it back to these priorities and thinking about how your project speaks to each of them. So I'll start with equitable partnerships. So whether you're partnering with individual artists or maybe you're collaborating with another organization for this project, we really want to ensure that this collaboration is as equitable as possible. This may be in the form of compensating your partners or maybe hired artists or contractors appropriately, giving appropriate credit to contributors, and ensuring that the relationship with your collaborators is generative and not necessarily one-sided, like it's a true partnership. So definitely keep that in mind. There is an opportunity to upload your project budget within the application, and we definitely recommend being really transparent about how you are compensating artists appropriately, for example. Next, I'm going to talk a little about cultural sustainability. So what we're really trying to prioritize here is the idea that if you're aiming to engage a specific group or community with this proposed project, we really want to ensure that the communities that the project aims to serve are actually being served and being represented in the program design and able to engage in a constructive or even critical way. So how will that project live beyond itself, especially if it's impacting different community groups? And how are those groups actually being represented throughout the process and not just being listed in the application as a priority? So our jurors will definitely be really looking very closely at that and determining if it does seem to be a very, very equitable partnership and sustainable. For this contribution to public knowledge piece, this is a little bit straightforward, and we mentioned this in the application too, but as this is a regional program, we want to make sure that the project is actually accessible to the people in Wisconsin and contributes to public knowledge in some way, whether that comes across in, I don't know, like community programming, or maybe there's a culminating project at the end of the whole project that is very accessible. This could take a variety of forms, but making sure that public knowledge is being contributed to and accessible is important. Creative change and innovation. We're thinking about what is unique about your project. In what way are you engaging in the content of your project in a different way than before? what do you hope to shift from and gain from this project? This grant is a sizable grant of 100,000 or 200,000 over 2 years, and that definitely provides a lot of room to do some really ambitious work that you might not have been able to before. So how is that going to take form for you? And I think that that goes hand in hand with the ambition and timeliness piece. So I think similarly, like, why are you engaging in this project at this moment in time? Why is it critical for you? Like, we care a lot about that. And we know that this grant is aimed at smaller and mid-sized organizations. So budgets less than $2 million. So how does this project allow you to kind of move your organization forward and hopefully have a long-term impact for your mission? Next, the support of historically underrepresented artists, practices, and histories. For many different reasons, it's fair to say that certain groups may not have received the same recognition and representation as others. So how does your project support, engage with, and uplift those groups? Something that I want to mention about this, because we've received this question before, we've been asked if we have a specific list in mind of underrepresented communities. To that, we say no. That is up to your application and project to determine what communities or what groups are you trying to reach in relation to your organization's mission. I think that this program priority also goes hand in hand with the equitable partnerships piece that we mentioned before. This engagement with underrepresented communities, if that's a large part of your application, should respect cultural self-determination and very genuine collaboration. I understand that in some application processes, it may be easy to view this as simply like a bullet point in your application, but the jurors will really be reviewing this closely to ensure that the support and justification behind this piece of the program priorities are genuine and equitable throughout the process. So that was a little bit about program priorities, and now I'll talk a little bit about logistically who is eligible and who could actually apply. So all applying organizations must have missions centered around visual and performing arts. And eligible organizations' operations must primarily take place in Wisconsin. So this includes who can apply: 501c3 nonprofit arts and culture organizations with budgets less than $2 million, with operating budgets per year less than $2 million. This also includes tribal nations of Wisconsin. And if maybe you have a really exciting project, but you're not a formalized 501c3, we are also welcoming applications from projects that have a fiscal sponsor that is a 501c3. Something to note here is that if you do fall into that category, if you have a project and you are fiscally sponsored and hoping to acquire funding in that way, successful applicants will be required to provide a copy of that agreement prior to the time of the grant being made. And going along with this, fiscal sponsors and tribal nations may have budgets above that $2 million mark. And we kind of expect that based on the types of organizations they are. I'm going to take a quick moment to just review and share a couple of projects from our inaugural Wisconsin Special Project grantees that were awarded this past spring. So these are all 2-year projects. And I'm not going to spend too much time talking through each of these. I definitely recommend that you dive into our website to learn a little bit more about each of them, because they're all really exciting groups doing really ambitious projects, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how those projects continue to develop over the next 2 years, or over the next year, I guess, at this point. Also, something that I want to note is that a lot of these projects exist across a wide range of ideas, disciplines, and focus areas. Project grants were awarded to a variety of types of groups. Like we have fiscally sponsored projects in this cohort, such as Biziki, We also have a brand new 501c3 organization, Cactus Plus, and also support of long-established organizations such as the Hmong American Center. So as you could see, as I'll just briefly like flip through these slides, we've received the question in the past of like, does it matter how long my organization has been established? Like, or questions such as, will a very small budget reflect negatively in the review of my application? I like to share these grantees to show that kind of no matter the organization size or format, what really matters is the work that's being done with this project and the mission of the project itself. A small or newly minted nonprofit that won't negatively impact your application. So now, speaking of the application, I'll talk a little bit about what that process looks like. Starting with the timeline, the application opened earlier this October. We're having the information session today. Thank you for joining. And the application will close December 9th at 11:59 Central Time. And so that you know what to expect after that, throughout December through February, our jury will be evaluating and scoring applications to make the recommendations of what should be awarded. And by April of 2025, we'll be able to publicly announce the grantees. So diving a little bit more into the jury. So applications are being reviewed this year by a panel of 12 distinguished jurors from across the United States, of course, with final approval granted by Ruth Arts, but they will really be scoring and evaluating these applications. And this jury is composed of scholars, educators, artists, curators, and community organizers. Some of them are all of the above with perspectives especially suited for this program. Their identities will remain confidential. Something to keep in mind as you craft your application is that even though Ruth Arts is based in Wisconsin, these jurors are based from all over the country and may not be familiar with your organization, even if your organization is very well known locally. So within the application, there is a question that asks broadly about your organization's mission and background. We recommend ensuring that you're able to speak to that question as if the person reading your application is unfamiliar with your work already. I'm not going to speak a ton about these scoring categories because, as you can see, they look very similar to the program priorities that I mentioned earlier. Because those ideas are central to the goals of this grant program, the jury will be scoring applications through the lens of each of these categories. So again, as you're crafting your responses to the application questions, make sure that each of these priorities are represented in those answers. All right. So that was just a little fly through of the evaluation process and application for Wisconsin Special Projects. We actually have, like I mentioned earlier, a special guest here today, Geeks, that will be running a brief presentation. And I see that they popped on, so thank you for joining. I'm going to reshare my screen and share their presentation. And I will let you all introduce yourselves.
Great. Hello. Thank you for having us. So we are Geeks, which is short for the Glass Education Exchange, and our staff consists of myself, Helen Lee, as director, Emily Leach as assistant director, and Ben Orozco as graphic designer and web manager. Next slide, please.
Geeks is a nonprofit online educational program that centers voices which have been historically marginalized in the field of glass art. Geeks produces artist talks, community building programming, and resources for professional development for glass artists. Next slide.
In the landscape of Ruth Arts grantees, our organizational priorities are that we are an artist-founded educational platform that produces scholarship in contemporary craft education, building an archive of BIPOC and queer visual artists working in and beyond the field of glass, and our work prioritizes accessibility, respect, and value retention.
Over the past 4 and counting years, Geeks has produced 35 long-form artist talks, Q&As, and podcast episodes through our primary program, Geeks Talks. With the support of Ruth Art Wisconsin Special Projects Grant, the 5th season of Geeks Talks will come in a new format, which is called Geek Shorts. This year's roster of speakers includes the following artists: Kayla Cantu, Annie Liu, Chris Roman, Dima Sruji, Josefina Munoz Torres, and Project Fire of Firebird Community Arts. These 6 speakers will address the themes of the body, skin, and crossroads. Next slide. Geek Shorts evolves this established lecture series into a new format. In 2020, Geeks was founded at the peak of demand for online teaching resources. Moving farther away from the initial pivot to virtual teaching, the Geeks team noticed less engagement with our long-form content. At the same time, audience feedback was communicating that the quality of what we were producing was still highly valuable. As a natural solution, we needed to prioritize promotion of our content, but promotion for the sake of promotion becomes kind of a vexing budget line that doesn't really innovate the ultimate bottleneck of declining attention spans. Geek Shorts introduces 1 to 5 minute segments, solving the need for promotion by creating a mini program of its own. Rather than one 40-minute artist talk followed by an equally long Q&A, Geeks Talk structures the artist talks and Q&A model into a series of short segments. This format offers bite-sized snippets of insights from each artist and encourages viewers to engage more deeply with any given speaker.
Our historical reach between lectures, which are shown here in blue, and Q&As, which is the red line, has fluctuated anywhere between 100 to 500 YouTube views. And having a baseline from which to identify a goal in your application is really helpful from an application perspective. Next slide. 2 key goals that we had with this grant were to build out our toolkit to create regular short-form educational content for greater accessibility, engagement, and reach via social media, increasing overall engagement with our entire platform. And in the long term, our goal was to continue building a community that has enthusiasm for glass as an artistic medium and is a community that prioritizes respect, visibility, and monetary support for BIPOC and queer voices in glass. We're 28 days into our new season, and it's incredibly rewarding to see that our YouTube channel reach is nearly 20,000 people, and for our viewership to spike from 500 to over 16,000 views. Next slide. COVID drastically recast the landscape of education, and it continues to evolve. The query of what is education today is a key aspect of our motivation. This question and our answer wrestles with the reality of meeting folks where they're at with respect to attention span and platforms, and the painful reality that it's not just a matter of producing good content, but driving your audience to the content. How do you build and make promotion and accessible content a core part of your suite of production assets, inclusive of small, medium, and large attention spans? Next slide. As an organization with roots in the field of glass art, the Wisconsin Special Project Grants builds bridges for geeks to other creative communities, both in Wisconsin and beyond. The honor brings both broader national visibility to geeks, which is crucial for a young nonprofit, and it bridges glass into dialogue with currents in contemporary discourse. Next.
It also gives geeks the opportunity to reintroduce to the creative community that artistic glassmaking in America is a Wisconsin legacy, where we are doing the work of updating that narrative and replenishing the archive to center BIPOC and queer voices. I'm sure most folks in the audience are well aware that Wisconsin falls dead last amongst all 50 states in funding the arts. So we all know just how few and far between these opportunities are in this state in particular. With respect to tips for future applicants, the intersection of a generous funding opportunity coupled with one that is so values aligned felt key in assembling our application, which is to say, know what value you bring with respect to the question on cultural knowledge and practices. Next slide. Secondly, think about how to refresh your program. As an example, even a little thing like $100 honorariums for question solicitation, which is now an ongoing part of our program, can be a huge motivational factor that shifts engagement and makes a different statement about what it is to be tuned in. Next slide. Lastly, think holistically. It might not be thrilling to evidence this via budget lines, but budgets are a great place to think very holistically about everything you might possibly need to really achieve new goals beyond the scope of your current capabilities. This is a peek at the budget lines we considered both seasonally on the left and per speaker on the right for production, promo, graphic design, advertising/boosting, and more. So thank you. We hope this insight into our experience into the Wisconsin Special Projects Grant has been helpful to you. And to learn more about Geeks and our ongoing project, here are a few links we'll drop in the chat.
Thank you all so much for joining and sharing some more information about your project, as well as some tips for applicants. We really appreciate that. And yeah, definitely for everybody participating in the webinar, go check out Geeks' resources and project. It's really cool. And you could also find information about it. They're highlighted as one of our this past year's grantees on our Wisconsin Special Projects website.
Thanks for having us.
Yes, thank you. All right. So now that we've had that great presentation, we're going to start opening up the floor for some questions for about the next 20 minutes or so. Just while you're thinking about your questions, you could begin to drop them into the Q&A portion of Zoom, and my colleague Sarah will be reviewing them and sharing which ones we're going to answer today. I'm going to just start out by sharing some responses to some questions that have come in throughout the last few weeks in preparation for the info session, or questions that just have been asked of us that we feel like were super common that we want to kind of share the answers to today. Something else to note is if your specific questions don't get answered today, those we aim to share out the answers on our FAQs portion of our Wisconsin Special Projects page. So the answer should be shared there. And of course, if you have additional specific questions that you'd like the answer to, definitely email us at wsp@rutharts.org. And I believe my colleague Erin is dropping that in the chat too. So, okay, so yes, get started dropping your questions in the Q&A. In the meantime, I'll read off some questions and answers that we've gotten over the past few weeks. So there was a couple of questions that came in related to application materials, as well as like the content of the projects themselves. One of these were related to kind of infrastructure improvements or like general operating type support. And it was asked if infrastructure improvements are considered project-based or if programming is more of the goal for the Special Projects Grant. So I guess I'd answer that by saying that the focus of this grant is on special projects, which does typically tend to be more programmatic. However, if the infrastructure improvements or even things like capacity building or operating support are project-based and linked to your special project directly, that could be acceptable to include within your budget. However, infrastructure improvements alone wouldn't necessarily be considered a special project. So I guess when you're crafting your budget, just keep that in mind. Something else to keep in mind is that up to 25% of the lines in your budget could be allocated to operating support, because we understand that there's a lot of different pieces that go into programming. So that is there for you too to keep in mind. And you'll also see if, for those of you that have already gotten started on your application, once you download that budget template, you'll see that it's pretty flexible. We've adapted it from the Rainin Foundations in an effort to make it more, I guess, applicable for if you're applying to other sorts of grants with that, with this project too. And there's room for editing the line items and making it your own. We just ask that you do indeed use that template so that our jurors could fairly evaluate everything. Yes, so another question that we've got is if there is an existing long-term project that our organization already had in mind or has in mind, can we apply with that? Or does the application have to be for an entirely new initiative? So for this, I'd say a little bit of both. If you're considering iterating on a previous project or something that you've been thinking about for a long time, carefully reflect on its new potential and connection to this grant program's priorities. If it naturally fits in with the goals of the grant program and the mission, then that sounds like a great fit. And it's even better that you've been thinking about it for a long time and thinking about how to best enact this project. However, if there's just a long-term project that you've had in mind that you're just trying to fit in the box of this program, while it may not be the best fit, definitely take your time and thoughtfully consider if it's worth putting forward an application for that, or if you want to take the time and kind of rethink a project to apply with even next year or when you're ready with it, because this program is planned to be offered annually. We also received some questions related to collaboration and organization eligibility. For those of you that have already started the application, you'll notice that there is a section specific to collaborative projects, because we understand that it's important. The collaboration is important. It's important to bring a variety of perspectives to the table, and it's really exciting if you're thinking about doing that. So a question that we've received is, so my arts and culture organization has a budget of over 2 million. So they would not normally be eligible. However, they're interested in collaborating with an organization that is eligible and meets all of those, like less than $2 million operating budget, arts and culture organization based in Wisconsin. So they're wondering if, essentially, if an ineligible organization may collaborate with an eligible organization. And to that, we would say, yes, as long as the eligible organization is the primary applicant for the project, you could definitely submit a collaborative project proposal together. The eligible organization would be responsible for submitting the application. However, if you're considering going that route, make sure that both organizations are really clear on the expectations and process that you'd like to follow if you should receive funds. For example, like which organization is responsible for administering or distributing the funds for the project. For organizations that may be in a different location, like maybe there's a Wisconsin organization collaborating with one right outside of Wisconsin, how are you ensuring that the project is actually accessible in Wisconsin and based in Wisconsin? So that primary applicant should meet all eligibility requirements that we've talked about before. Something else to note is that no matter if you are collaborating with a different organization or like individuals, such as individual artists, Ruth Arts will require letters of intent from any named collaborators. If your organization, and you've seen this if you've already started applying, but if your applying organization is partnering with a different organization, you will have the opportunity to share further details about that relationship within the application itself. And that will include a letter of intent signed by representatives of the partnering organizations. Okay. Another kind of collaboration-based question. How many organizations can collaborate on a project? I'll start with saying also, don't submit 2 applications for the same project, like one per collaborator. It would be best to consolidate those efforts and put them into one project. But within the grant application, I mentioned this earlier, Ruth Arts allows for the primary applicant to list one additional organization collaborator. This is different than individual collaborators, like those individual artists example that I mentioned earlier. And for successful projects that are collaborative, grant agreements and funds will be administered to just one organization, and it will be the responsibility of that org to distribute funds to collaborators accordingly. Next, we have a couple of eligibility questions that I thought might be helpful to go over. I am affiliated with a university or higher education arts institution. If you've reviewed our eligibility requirements, you'll see that we are not accepting proposals from them. Can the arts department and or faculty artists apply if the department budget does not exceed $2 million? Right now, no, we are not accepting applications from these educational institutions or departments within. Eligible organizations just include 501c3 arts and culture organizations. That includes fiscally sponsored projects, and Wisconsin tribal nations. However, that being said, if you would like to kind of promote the artistic practices or projects of your staff or faculty artists, definitely encourage them to apply, maybe in collaboration or with another organization or under the fiscal sponsorship of a qualifying organization. Last kind of eligibility question before we'll start taking the Q&As from the chat. My 501c3 organization fluctuates over and under 2 million. Are we eligible? So the grant is really dedicated to small and mid-sized organizations, which is why we specify that annual operating budget must be below $2 million. We really wanted to target those orgs because we understand with often, or it can be the case that in a lot of funding patterns, even regionally, funds are often maybe allocated to the larger organizations. So that's why we really wanted to focus on the smaller ones. And I guess that's all to say that within the application, you'll be asked to provide your most recent board-approved annual operating budget. So please provide the most up-to-date information. You're welcome to share additional notes and supporting documents about that. However, it must be below $2 million. All right. I think that we could start welcoming any questions from the Q&A or from the webinar participants. Sarah, if there's any that stick out that we should start with, let us know.
Sure. We have one about a question about the eligibility of city or government agencies or specific projects, special projects within them.
Yeah, in terms of that eligibility, no, we aren't accepting applications from those types of entities. That does not apply to tribal nations, though. But other municipalities and city government, no.
Well, another one that came in is, if we were rejected last year, can we resubmit for the same project?
Oh, that's a great question. I would say yes, you are welcome to resubmit. The application has changed ever so slightly from last year, so keep that in mind. However, I would say that I think that it would be a good opportunity to kind of rethink that application and take the time to, based on the program priorities, and I'd even recommend looking at last year's successful applicants too, to see areas where you might be able to improve your application or better align with the goals of the program. Just so that I don't know if it would be necessarily worth it to submit the exact same application. That being said, this jury will be different than last year, and so they will bring their own perspectives and priorities to the table, but they will definitely be evaluating applications within the same lens. So I guess I would say it's up to you, but definitely make sure that you're being thoughtful with your time, and it's definitely worth taking another look and refining the application again.
Thanks. Okay, some more questions about the application. Should budget include just Ruth Arts funds or Ruth Arts plus additional or matching funds?
That's a great question. I would say the template that you will see is aimed for Ruth Arts funds. However, if a big portion, or I guess I would say if a big component of your project is that it is collaborative, or maybe or you are accepting funds from elsewhere too, you can go ahead and include those. Just make sure to specify within that template which funds would be coming from Ruth Arts and which ones would be coming from elsewhere. What our jurors will be really looking at is the funds that will fall under the bucket of Ruth Arts grants amount that you're applying for. So they'll be looking for what's under the 100,000 or 200,000, depending on which level of funding you're applying for. So just be specific.
And Zola, what about capital projects, capital campaigns? For example, building a new theater space or black box?
That is a great question. I would say that this kind of falls under one of the ideas I mentioned earlier, that the project-based grant, it should be for a special project, and those types of campaigns or capital projects would not be considered a special project in itself. However, if there's maybe some support that goes along with it, you may be able to mention that, but I wouldn't say that those alone would be eligible for this application or would be the good fit for this program.
Okay, another one that just came in, tied to a previous question. Can the project be mostly or fully funded by Ruth Arts, or is a match required or preferred?
I'd say a match is definitely not required or preferred. Of course, we want to make sure, like, we love for these projects to get support. We hope that you find additional funding. However, no, we do not in any way prioritize that there is a match within the application review.
Are there any restrictions on what funding can be used for? For example, can a portion of funding go towards staff salaries?
Yeah, that another great question. Yeah, I would say depending on your project, yes, that could definitely be a part of what's included with your budget. Like I mentioned, up to 25% could be allocated to general operating, understanding that often that type of support is needed to enact some of these larger projects. So yes.
Is a letter of intent required for individual collaborators or just organizational collaborators?
Yes, I'd say that the difference would be, though, that within your application, if it's an organization collaborator, you will be required to submit a letter of intent, like with your application. But you will not be required to do that within the application for your individual collaborators. However, if you were to be awarded this grant, Ruth Arts would require those letters of intent from the individuals at that time, prior to distributing funds.
Okay, there's a multi-part question. Do authors writing about designers and architects in Wisconsin qualify as artists? And related to that, would a multi-chapter publication be considered a special project?
I guess I would say for those questions, it kind of, I'd say that's up to your definition, to your organization's or project's definition of, you'll be asked to describe how the project is special within the application. So that's a great opportunity to do that there. I would say that we're open to those interpretations of what art and artists can be or can look like. You will just be asked to kind of support that within your application. Sorry. I have one note about that as I was thinking about it further. We do specify that this grant is in support of visual or performing arts. So keep that in mind as well. Like I would say that literary arts alone would not be as best a fit for this. However, I know that there's probably many different ways that the project that you've described could expand, but just keep that in mind too.
Is paying for workshop costs considered operating cost? For example, paying the hourly fee for teaching the class as well as paying for materials needed?
I guess I would say that that's definitely up to how you want to allocate it in your budget. However, if those workshops are part of your special project, I think that that would count as that could be included as part of the special project budget. I think we have time for maybe let's take 2 more questions and then I'll wrap up the presentation. And just as a reminder, definitely send any questions that we didn't get to that email address that's on the slide, wsp@rutharts.org. We make it a priority to respond to those so that we could get your questions answered. And it also really helps us as we consider more resources to put on the program page on our website. So definitely, if we don't get to your question today, please do continue to send those to us.
Okay, the last questions. What if an org is brand new and doesn't have a previous operating budget?
I guess it depends on like how brand new you're talking. I will say though that we have like I mentioned earlier, one of our grantees last year had or this past year, sorry, had really just received their nonprofit status, and that was possible. So I guess what I would say for that is depending on how brand new you are, if there's anything that your board has approved, or if you have projected budget, that may also work. Yeah, just I guess, provide as much information as you can about that with the knowledge that you have.
Would a cover letter be appreciated as part of the application? Can a PDF of the grant proposal be included as an attachment?
Yeah, I guess it's a good question. I would say that our jurors will be evaluating within the application portal, so it would not be the best use of resources to attach a PDF version of the application in addition to submitting via the portal. And if you were considering just sending a PDF, we won't be able to accept that. And we do ask that you submit your application through the portal with the questions that we've specified. And as far as the cover letter question, while there is space, as you'll see within the application, to upload some supplementary materials, our jurors will be evaluating the application based on what it asks for, and they will not have, we wouldn't recommend submitting additional supplementary materials such as a cover letter. I guess maybe we would want might ask for a little bit more context about that. So maybe email WSP@rutharts.org so we could give you a more specific answer.
There's one last really easy one. Do you want one more?
Sure.
How many grants will be awarded in 2025?
Oh, I love that question. 10, up to 10. And oh wow, actually that's a good reminder too. Although specified in the application, this is for, you could request 100,000 or 200,000 over 2 years. And so it's not, don't plan for like receiving a range of like 150 or something like that. It'll be 100 or 200,000 over 2 years. And yes, we'll be able to support up to 10 projects with this cycle. All right. I think that with that, that will be our last question accepted here. However, like I mentioned, please do continue to send those to us through that email inbox, because those really help us as well to relay the information that we need to you all. Just to kind of briefly go over what next steps will look like. I know I talked through the timeline a bit earlier as well, but we plan to publish a recording of this info session for those that weren't able to make it as soon as possible to our website in early November, as well as a transcript. So as participants in this webinar, you'll get an email notifying you when that's ready. Applications are due at 11:59 Central Time, 11:59 p.m. Central Time, December 9th. The jury will be reviewing through February, and the grantee public announcement will be in April. One other thing that I see popping up, kind of based around like the decision process for this year, something to note is that this year we will be introducing an avenue for juror feedback following this year's application cycle for unsuccessful applications, so that hopefully that may better inform future grant applications with us. So that will be available upon request, and we'll also share more about that when we share decisions later this spring. All right. With that, we look forward to welcoming all of your applications, and thank you so much for joining us today and spending this hour with us. We appreciate it. And I can't wait to see all the exciting projects that come through. And I know